The dusty town of Cedar Ridge baked under the endless western sky. It was a place of hard work and simple pleasures, a place where the mountains stood as silent, watchful guardians over the lives of the people below. On the outskirts of this town, where the wild prairie grasses began to dance with the wind, stood a ranch. It was a good ranch, with sturdy fences and a strong barn, but the house at its center often felt too quiet, too empty. This was the home of Isaac, a man in his late 20s whose strong hands were more comfortable with rope and reins than with conversation. Isaac was a good man, known for his honesty and his hard work. But a deep sadness clung to him, a quiet shadow that followed him through his days. Several years ago, a sickness had swept through the territory, and it had taken his parents and his younger sister. He was left alone with the vast ranch and an even vaster silence. He would come home after a long day under the sun to a dark house and a cold stove, with no one to ask about his day, no one to share a meal with. He prayed, but sometimes it felt like his words just vanished into the wide, empty sky, unheard. One afternoon, his older neighbor, a kind and cheerful man named Benjamin, found Isaac mending a fence with more force than was necessary. "You're going to scare the posts right into the ground, son," Benjamin said with a gentle smile. Isaac just grunted. Benjamin leaned against the fence. "This solitude isn't good for a man's spirit, Isaac. A ranch is meant for a family. It's time." Benjamin spoke of a practice some men used, writing to women back east who were also seeking a new beginning, a chance for a family through marriage. Isaac was skeptical. It seemed like a business deal, not the way to find a wife. But the loneliness was a heavy weight, and after many more nights of prayer he finally agreed. He placed a small, carefully worded advertisement in a newspaper back east. Weeks later a letter arrived. The handwriting was neat and graceful. It was from a woman named Harmony. She wrote not just about her skills in keeping a home, but about her faith. She wrote about trusting God's path, even when it was unfamiliar. Her words were thoughtful and kind. Isaac found himself looking forward to her letters more than anything. They wrote back and forth for many months. He learned she had lost her own parents and was living with a cousin who made her feel unwelcome. She dreamed of a real home, a partnership, a life built on shared faith and purpose. Isaac began to feel a flicker of hope. He started to see not just a helper for the ranch, but a companion for his life. He saved up money and sent her a train ticket. Remembering a story his mother had told him, he also sent a simple wedding veil with his letter. He wrote, "Let our first meeting be at the train station, and let me see your face for the first time as my wife. It will be a new beginning for both of us." It was a romantic notion, one that felt brave and full of promise. Harmony wrote back that she loved the idea and would wear the veil. The day of her arrival felt longer than any day Isaac had ever known. He hitched his wagon, dressed in his best shirt, and drove into town. His heart was pounding like a drum. As the train whistle echoed in the distance, his courage began to falter. The fear he had pushed down for months came rushing back. What if she was disappointed? The town was small, his life was simple and hard. What if her letters were just pretty words and she saw how rough he was around the edges? What if he was not the man she hoped he would be? The train screeched to a halt, steam billowing out. People began to step down. And then he saw her. A single figure in a simple dress, a delicate veil covering her face completely. She stood there, clutching a small suitcase, looking lost and alone on the busy platform. His feet felt like blocks of wood. He walked over to her. All the warm, hopeful words he had practiced vanished from his mind. The fear wrapped around his heart, making it cold. He stopped in front of her. "Harmony?" he said, his voice rough and low. She nodded slightly. He did not smile. He did not offer to take her bag. He simply said, "I'm Isaac. The wagon is this way." He turned and started walking, expecting her to follow. He did not see the way her shoulders slumped in confusion beneath her dress. He did not see the tear that escaped from under the veil and traced a path through the train soot on her cheek. He only saw his own doubts and fears. The ride back to the ranch was silent, the only sound being the creak of the wagon wheels and the pounding of two lonely, disappointed hearts. The wagon ride to the ranch was a journey through a landscape of stunning beauty that neither of them saw. Isaac's gaze was fixed on some distant point ahead, his jaw set, his hands tight on the reins. Harmony sat beside him, her posture perfectly straight, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. The veil, once a symbol of hopeful mystery, now felt like a prison wall, trapping her confusion and hurt close to her skin. She had imagined this moment 100 times, each time picturing a shared smile, a kind word, a hand offered in support. She had not imagined this crushing silence, this feeling of being a burden being transported rather than a future wife being welcomed. She watched the vast, rolling hills and the towering mountains through the blur of her unshed tears, wondering if the freedom of this western land was a lie, and if she had simply traded one kind of loneliness for another. When the ranch house came into view, it was not the welcoming home she had pictured from his letters. It was a sturdy structure, yes, but it looked weathered and lonely against the big sky. Isaac brought the wagon to a halt and finally spoke, his voice flat. "This is it." He jumped down and, without looking at her, picked up her suitcase. He led the way to the porch, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. He opened the door and gestured inside. "I'll show you to your room." The interior was clean but sparsely furnished. There was a main room with a stone fireplace and a table with 2 chairs, and a small kitchen area. It felt functional but not lived in. It was a house, not a home. He led her down a short hallway and opened a door to a small, simple room with a bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the barn. "You can stay here," he said, setting her suitcase down just inside the door. The words felt heavy with a meaning she dreaded. "You can stay here for now. This is your space separate from mine." He left her then, muttering something about checking on the livestock. Harmony stood in the center of the room, the silence of the house pressing in on her. Slowly she reached up and for a moment considered lifting the veil. But the act felt too final, too revealing in this place that felt so cold. She let her hands drop. She unpacked her few belongings, placing her well-worn Bible on the nightstand, her fingers lingering on its cover for a moment of silent prayer. She tried to busy herself, stepping back into the main room and looking for any sign of the man who had written such thoughtful letters. She saw a book on animal husbandry, a pair of worn work gloves, but nothing of his heart. The sun began to set, casting long, lonely shadows across the wooden floor. Isaac returned as dusk was settling, his presence filling the doorway. He had avoided the house for as long as he could, the guilt and confusion warring inside him. He had tended to every animal twice, fixed a hinge on the barn door that didn't need fixing, anything to postpone facing the woman and the mess he had created. He found her sitting at the table, her veiled head bowed. She had attempted to start a supper, finding some beans and salt pork, but her movements had been hesitant and unsure in this unfamiliar kitchen. The meal was quiet. The only sounds were the clink of forks on tin plates and the crackle of the small fire Isaac had lit in the hearth. He ate quickly, his eyes on his plate, then stood abruptly. "I have accounts to see to," he lied and retreated to the barn, leaving her alone once more with the dirty dishes and her shattered hopes. That night, Harmony finally removed the veil in the darkness of her room. The cool air on her face was a small relief. She knelt beside the bed, the rough wooden floorboards hard against her knees, and she prayed. She did not pray for an easy life or to be sent back. She prayed for strength. She prayed for understanding. She prayed that God would soften Isaac's heart and show her what to do. A few tears fell, hot and silent, onto the woven blanket, but her resolve hardened. She had come here in faith and she would not give up so easily. The next morning she was up before the sun, determined to try again. She had the stove lit and coffee brewing when Isaac came in from his morning chores. She offered a soft, "Good morning," but he only gave a curt nod, pouring himself a cup of coffee and drinking it standing by the door as if ready to flee at any moment. The hurt was a physical ache in her chest. Just as the silence was becoming unbearable, a cheerful voice called out from the yard. "Hello, the house." A moment later, an older man with a kind, weathered face and a warm smile stepped onto the porch. It was Benjamin. Isaac let him in, and Benjamin's eyes immediately found Harmony, who stood nervously by the stove, having not yet put her veil back on. Her face was open, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Well now," Benjamin said, his smile genuine. "You must be Harmony. I'm Benjamin, Isaac's neighbor and friend. It's a true pleasure to meet you." His warmth was like a sunbeam in the cold room, and Harmony felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. She managed a small smile in return. "It's nice to meet you, sir." Benjamin stayed for a cup of coffee, expertly filling the silence with talk of the weather, a new calf born in his herd and local news. He directed gentle questions at Harmony, and she answered softly, her voice melodic. Isaac watched them, a strange knot tightening in his stomach. He saw the way Harmony's face lit up at the simple kindness, and it made his own harsh behavior feel even more shameful. After a while, Benjamin announced he needed to get back but asked Isaac to walk out with him to look at his wagon wheel, which he claimed was making a funny sound. Once they were outside, away from the house, Benjamin's cheerful demeanor faded. He turned to Isaac, his expression serious. "What in the world is the matter with you, son?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Isaac scuffed his boot in the dirt, unable to meet his friend's gaze. "I don't know what you mean," he mumbled. "I saw her face, Isaac," Benjamin said. "She's hurting. And you're stomping around like a bear with a thorn in its paw. You wrote to that woman for months. You told me just last week how her last letter made you laugh. And now you're treating her like an unwanted stranger. You're judging a book by its cover, and from what I saw, it's a mighty fine cover. But you're so afraid of the story inside, you won't even open it." Isaac finally looked up, the truth of Benjamin's words hitting him like a physical blow. He hadn't even given her a chance. He had been so consumed by his own fear of not being enough, of being disappointed, that he had become the very thing he feared, a disappointment. He had been loving the idea of her, the words on a page, but rejecting the living, breathing woman who had traveled so far on a promise fueled by those very words. I was scared," he admitted, the confession feeling like a weight being lifted. Benjamin placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to be scared, Isaac. It's not okay to let that fear rob you of the blessing God might be trying to give you. You need to make this right. You need to truly see her." Benjamin left, and Isaac stood in the yard for a long time, the morning sun warm on his back. He thought of Harmony's quiet dignity, her attempt to make supper, the sound of her voice speaking with Benjamin. He thought of the pain he had put in her eyes. Shame washed over him, clean and sharp. He walked back to the house, his steps slower and more purposeful than they had been in days. He found her where he had left her, standing by the window in the main room, her back to him. She had heard the wagon leave and had assumed he would not return until supper. She had put the veil back on, a final, sad attempt to hold on to the dream they had planned. Isaac stopped in the doorway, his heart aching at the sight. He took a deep breath. "Harmony?" he said, his voice softer than it had been since she arrived. She turned slowly. He took a step into the room, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. He could see the faint outline of her features through the delicate fabric. "I have acted poorly," he began, his words halting but sincere. "I was unkind and unwelcoming. I was afraid, and I let that fear make me a coward. The man who wrote you those letters, he's still here. I am so sorry." He paused, gathering his courage. Would you please take off your veil? I would truly like, to see the woman I have been writing to." For a long moment Harmony didn't move. Then her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, slowly lifted. She reached up and with a grace that stole his breath, she carefully lifted the veil from her face, letting it fall back over her hair. Isaac's breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, with kind eyes the color of the summer sky and a gentle strength in her expression. But more than her beauty, he saw the traces of tears on her cheeks and the quiet hope shining through the hurt in her eyes. In that moment he didn't just see Harmony. He saw the partner he had been praying for, the woman who had shown more courage and faith in 2 days than he had in 2 years. He had been a fool, but as he looked into her eyes, he dared to hope for a second chance. The silence in the room after the veil was lifted was not the heavy, painful silence of the days before. This silence was fragile, filled with the weight of Isaac's apology and the tentative hope dawning on Harmony's face. Isaac could not look away from her. Seeing her features, the direct and honest gaze from eyes that had known sadness but had not been broken by it, made the reality of his poor behavior crushingly clear. The woman from the letters was no longer just a voice on a page. She was here, real, and he had wounded her deeply. "Can we?" he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Can we sit? Can we start again?" Harmony gave a slow, careful nod, and they moved to the 2 chairs by the cold fireplace. It was there, in the quiet of the morning, that the walls began to truly come down. Isaac did not hold back. He spoke of the loneliness that had haunted him since his family passed, a loneliness so profound that the empty house echoed with it. He confessed his fear that a woman from the East, used to a faster life, would find his simple ranch and his quiet ways disappointing. "I thought if I kept you at a distance," he admitted, staring at his hands, "the rejection wouldn't hurt as much when it came. I was trying to protect a heart that had forgotten how to hope." Harmony listened, her hands folded in her lap. When he finished, she spoke softly, not of her hurt, but of her own journey. She spoke of the cousin's house where she felt like an unpaid servant, a shadow in someone else's home. She spoke of reading his letters and feeling a kinship, a shared understanding of loss and a shared faith in God's plan. "I did not come for an easy life, Isaac," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I came for a true one. I came because your words spoke of a good man who believed in the same things I do. I was not afraid of hard work. I was only afraid of a closed heart. Her words were a balm and a rebuke. He had been the one with the closed heart. He offered to show her the ranch, not as a chore or a duty but properly this time. She agreed, and they spent the rest of the morning walking the land. The change was immediate and profound. Isaac pointed out the spring where they got their water, the pasture where the cattle grazed, the stand of trees he logged for winter firewood. He showed her the newborn calves, and she didn't shy away from the messy reality of ranch life, instead reaching out a gentle hand to stroke a calf's head. He saw the way she observed everything, her eyes taking in the vastness and the beauty, not with fear, but with a quiet appreciation. In the afternoon she found her Bible and brought it out to the porch where he was resting. "Would you like to read with me?" she asked. It was a simple question, but it felt like the most intimate invitation he had received in years. They sat together on the porch steps, the late sun warming the wood, and took turns reading passages aloud. The words of faith and comfort, which had sometimes felt hollow to him in his grief, now seemed to ring with new meaning shared between them. Laughter, a sound that had been absent from the ranch for so long, finally returned when he tried to explain the different personalities of his work horses and she gave them names, her choices so perfectly fitting it made him grin. The days that followed began to weave a new pattern for their lives. Harmony was no longer a guest in the corner room, she became a part of the rhythm of the ranch. She learned to bake bread in the old stove, and while the first loaf was a little burnt, Isaac ate every crumb with genuine praise. She planted a small kitchen garden with seeds Benjamin's wife had kindly given her, her hands digging into the earth with a purpose that spoke of putting down roots. Isaac, in turn, found himself talking more, sharing stories of his parents, his dreams for expanding the herd, his thoughts on the weather. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of shared meals, of quiet conversation, of pages turning in the Bible, and of prayer. A week after her arrival, Isaac knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul what he needed to do. He found Harmony in the garden, carefully watering the tiny green shoots. He knelt in the dirt beside her, not caring about the soil on his trousers. "Harmony," he said, his voice clear and sure. "The way I welcomed you was wrong. But these last few days, getting to truly know you, it's been the greatest gift. You are everything your letters promised and more. You have brought light back into this house and hope back into my life." He took her hand. "I made you a promise through the mail. Now I want to make you a promise before God and our community. Will you marry me? For real this time?" Tears of joy welled in Harmony's eyes, but she was smiling. "Yes, Isaac," she whispered. "Yes." The following Sunday, in the simple white church in Cedar Ridge, with the sun streaming through the windows, they stood before the pastor. Benjamin stood proudly by Isaac's side as his helper. Harmony wore a simple, pretty dress and the same veil, but this time, it was thrown back over her hair, revealing a face radiant with happiness. As they spoke their vows, their hands were clasped tightly, their eyes locked. They promised to love and to cherish for better or for worse, in sickness and in health. The words were ancient, but to Isaac and Harmony, they were brand new, filled with the profound meaning of a second chance they had almost lost. When the pastor pronounced them man and wife, Isaac leaned down and kissed her, a soft, promise-filled kiss that sealed their new beginning not as strangers bound by an arrangement, but as partners bound by love, faith, and a choice they had both joyfully made. The seasons turned on the ranch, each one painting the land in new colors and bringing its own rhythm of work and rest. The deep greens of summer gave way to the fiery golds and reds of autumn, and then the quiet blanket of white that was winter. Through it all, the house that had once been so silent and lonely was now filled with a warmth that had little to do with the fire in the hearth. Isaac and Harmony settled into the comfortable, sturdy pattern of marriage. They were a team. Isaac still rose before the sun to tend to the livestock, but now he returned to the smell of coffee and fresh biscuits, and to a wife who greeted him with a smile that truly reached her eyes. Harmony learned the ways of the ranch, not just the household. She could name all the horses and knew which hen was the best layer. She helped with the harvest from her now flourishing kitchen garden, preserving vegetables and fruits for the long winter months. Their love was not a frantic, dramatic thing, but a deep and steady current that flowed through their daily lives. It was in the way Isaac would unexpectedly bring her a wildflower he found blooming stubbornly by the fence line. It was in the way Harmony would leave a lantern burning in the window on the nights he was late checking the far pasture. Evenings were spent side by side, Harmony mending clothes or working on a quilt while Isaac reviewed his accounts or cleaned his tools. They talked about everything: their hopes for the ranch, a passage from the Bible that had moved them, a funny thing one of the animals had done. The shadow of grief that had clung to Isaac for so long had finally retreated, replaced by a profound and quiet contentment. He often found himself pausing in his work, looking toward the house, and offering a silent prayer of gratitude for the woman who had healed his heart and his home. One crisp morning, nearly a year after their wedding, Harmony found Isaac in the barn, brushing down his favorite horse. The air was cold, and their breath made little clouds in the dim light. She stood beside him for a moment, her hand resting gently on his arm until he turned to look at her. There was a new softness in her expression, a mixture of joy and nervousness. "Isaac," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have something to tell you." She took a small breath, her eyes shining. "Our family is going to grow. We're going to have a baby." The brush fell from Isaac's hand, landing softly in the straw. For a moment he was utterly still, the words washing over him. Then, a joy so powerful it threatened to buckle his knees spread through his chest. A wide, incredulous smile broke across his face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, burying his face in her hair. "A baby?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "Truly?" Harmony nodded, laughing through her own happy tears. "Truly." He held her again, this time more gently, his hands spread protectively across her back. It felt like the final, most beautiful seal on their happiness, a blessing so immense he could scarcely take it in. They stood there in the quiet of the barn, wrapped in the warmth of their shared future, the promise of new life filling the space around them. The news transformed the winter. The cold months were no longer a time of waiting, but a time of preparation, filled with a happy, purposeful energy. Isaac's protectiveness over Harmony became a gentle, constant presence. He made sure the wood box was always full so she wouldn't have to carry heavy logs. He insisted on doing the more strenuous household chores himself. In the evenings, by the firelight, a new project began. Isaac, with his skilled, careful hands, took pieces of smooth, sanded wood from the old oak tree behind the house and began to build a cradle. He worked on it for weeks, carving the wood until it was silky to the touch, rocking it back and forth to test its motion, his heart swelling with a fierce, new kind of love for the child who would soon sleep within it. Harmony, in turn, busied herself with her own preparations. She sorted through the fabric scraps from her quilting, setting aside the softest, most well-worn pieces of cloth. She began to sew tiny garments, her needle moving in and out of the soft flannel and cotton, creating gowns and blankets so small they seemed meant for a doll. She hummed hymns as she worked, her hands often drifting to rest on the gentle swell of her belly, feeling the miraculous movements within. The ranch house, already a home, was now being woven into a nursery, every handmade item a stitch in the tapestry of the life they were building together. As the snows began to melt and the first brave shoots of green appeared in the fields, Harmony's time drew near. Isaac rode into town to fetch the doctor, his heart a frantic drumbeat of fear and excitement. The doctor returned with him and settled in for what turned out to be a long night. Isaac paced the main room, his prayers silent and fervent, each cry from the other room feeling like a physical blow. He stared into the fire, his knuckles white, pleading with God for the safety of his wife and his child. The night felt endless, a dark tunnel of worry. Then, just as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, a new sound cut through the stillness. It was not a cry of pain but the strong, healthy wail of a newborn. The bedroom door opened and the doctor appeared, his face tired but smiling. "You can come in now, Isaac," he said. Isaac's legs felt weak as he crossed the threshold. Harmony was lying in the bed, her face pale and streaked with sweat, but her eyes were radiant. In her arms, swaddled tightly in a soft, white blanket, was a tiny, perfect baby. "A son," Harmony whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with awe. Isaac knelt beside the bed, his large, calloused hand trembling as he reached out to gently touch his son's cheek. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, his mouth a tiny rosebud. He had a shock of dark hair just like Isaac's. Overwhelming love, fierce and protective and humbling all at once, flooded Isaac's entire being. He looked from his son to his wife, his heart too full for words. The long night was over and a new day, the most beautiful one of his life, had begun. The golden light of a late afternoon sun spilled through the window of the ranch house, painting the wooden floor in warm, long rectangles. The air was still and peaceful, carrying the faint, sweet scent of the wildflowers Harmony had placed in a jar on the table. In the center of the room, Harmony sat in the rocking chair Isaac had made for her during the final weeks of her waiting. She was gently swaying back and forth, a picture of quiet contentment. In her arms, swaddled in the soft hand-stitched blanket she had sewn, was their son. The baby, Caleb, was awake, his dark eyes, so like his father's, looking up at her with a solemn wonder. Harmony hummed a soft, old hymn, her fingers stroking his tiny, perfect hand. Isaac came in from the evening chores, removing his worn boots at the door to keep the floor quiet and clean. He stood for a long moment in the doorway, simply watching them. The sight of his wife and his son, safe and serene in the gentle glow of the home, struck him with a force that was both powerful and tender. He thought back to the man he had been just a couple of years before, a lonely figure moving through the empty rooms, his heart as silent as the walls around him. He remembered the cold fear that had gripped him at the train station, the way he had almost let his own shadows ruin the beautiful future God had been offering him. The memory was a sharp lesson in humility and grace. He walked over and knelt beside the rocking chair, the wood creaking softly under his weight. He looked at Caleb, who turned his gaze toward the movement, his little mouth making a small round O of curiosity. "He's getting stronger every day," Isaac whispered, his voice thick with a love so profound it still surprised him. Harmony smiled down at him, her love for this strong, gentle man shining in her eyes. "He is." He watched the sunlight on the wall for nearly 10 minutes today. Everything is so new to him. They sat in a comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the gentle creak of the rocker and the soft, snuffling breaths of their baby. The conversation turned, as it often did these days, to their son's future. They spoke of the ranch he would one day learn to run, the horses he would learn to ride, the values of faith and hard work they would strive to teach him. "I was thinking," Harmony said softly, her eyes meeting Isaac's, "about his name. Gil. It means faithful. And brave. Isaac considered this, looking at his son. Faithful, like the God who had never abandoned him, even in his deepest loneliness. Brave, like the woman who had crossed the country to marry a stranger, and who had forgiven him for his foolishness. "It's the perfect name for him," Isaac said, his heart full. "A reminder of how we got here." As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange, Isaac's thoughts grew more reflective. He reached out and took Harmony's free hand, lacing his rough, work-worn fingers with her softer ones. "When you took off that veil," he began, his gaze steady and sincere, "I saw your beautiful face for the first time. But it was getting to know your beautiful heart, your strength, and your faith these past months that has made me the richest man in the world. You saw the man I could be, even when I couldn't see it myself. You didn't just come here to be my wife, Harmony. You came here and you built a family with me. You and Caleb, you are my greatest blessing, my forever after." Harmony squeezed his hand, her smile as warm as the setting sun. "Our story almost had a very different ending," she replied. "But God's grace and a second chance gave us this." She looked around the cozy, warm room, at the cradle Isaac had built standing ready in the corner, at the Bible on the table, at the man she loved kneeling beside her. "This is the life I prayed for. This is the home I dreamed of." The baby began to fuss softly, and Harmony adjusted him in her arms, rocking a little faster. Isaac stood and lit the lantern, casting a soft, golden pool of light around their little family. He then sat in his own chair nearby, picking up his Bible, a deep and abiding peace settling over his spirit. The story that had begun with a lonely advertisement and a cold welcome on a train platform had been rewritten with patience, forgiveness, and faith. It had been woven into something strong and beautiful, a tapestry of shared love and devotion. They were no longer just two lonely people. They were a family bound together not just by vows, but by a love that had been tested and had emerged stronger, a love that would last a lifetime and beyond, their own true forever after. If you enjoyed this story of faith, forgiveness, and a love that was written in the stars, consider joining our community for more heartfelt tales. Subscribe to the channel for new stories of hope and redemption every week. Your support helps us continue to share these messages of love and second chances. Thank you for watching, and may your own story be filled with blessings.